as we're approaching 5 minutes but 12, I want to welcome everybody. We just had like a little conversation here with AJ. We didn't start yet. Super stoked to have AJ Agarwal from Bain Capital Ventures here on board on Fast Lane, our webinar series with the smartest and brightest VCs in town. Really glad and stoked to have you for the topic rise of the users, trends VCs are betting on. You know, we got like actually quite a lot of interest around that topic. I'm Christian Megel. I'm the founder of VentureLane. VentureLane is a early stage startup hub for B2B startups here in Boston. We're kind of a support system we have a space, as you can see here in the background, but we're also a support system here for B2B software companies in Boston, and doing this for 2 years. But sometimes we open up the gates and invite people like AJ to share their wisdom with us. So let's get started. AJ, you were already explaining. Like I'm impressed that you started right out of school and your first startup that got to $1 million in revenue and could have defined the CRM space, as we found out later on. Tell us a little bit about your background. I was particularly impressed that you actually did this, but then later on, joined Trilogy Software, earned your merits in the sales part, and therefore you're like an entrepreneur turned VC today. Maybe give us like a minute or 2 minutes on what your journey was and what brought you to Bain.
Yeah, so it's actually my journey is very connected to that initial story from college. So we got this business to $1 million in revenue in that era, and this guy Joe Lemont, who was brilliant, decided to drop out at the end of my sophomore year, end of his junior year. And he said to me, why don't you drop out with me? And I said, no, it was an easy decision for me. And I just said, this is like the greatest 4 years of my life. The only time in my life I get to be in college, and I've got 2 more years left. And frankly, the year we did the startup, my sophomore year, I sort of felt like I missed out on my sophomore year. I mean, I loved the startup, but I missed, that college experience. So he ended up dropping out and he started Trilogy, which was the next company. And Trilogy was a pioneer in the space called config, price, quote, and commission. So we would help salespeople configure, price, quote, and earn sales commissions on whatever they were selling. Typically it was a complex product like a HP mainframe or a Boeing airplane or a telecom switch. And so I ended up graduating. I spent a couple years in consulting, and Joe kept hounding me to come down to Austin, where he'd moved the company and join. So I ended up joining as employee 18, started off as a product manager, and I ended up building a business inside of Trilogy, and ultimately I ended up running both product as well as the go-to-market. And it was, Joe's an amazing entrepreneur. He found incredible product market fit. The business was a rocket. It was less than $1 million when I got there. 6 years later, we were $300 million in revenue. We had 2,000 employees. My team was 400, and it was an amazing experience. And just experiencing hyper growth. And I realized very quickly what Joe meant in college when he said enterprise software is the greatest business on the planet. I mean, we built the software, and in those days, you got all the money up front. It was not SaaS, it was not subscription. You charge an upfront license fee, and literally the customer, to the day the contract signed, would wire you the full amount of the contract. And so we were selling these $5 million contracts, to companies like Whirlpool and so forth. And literally the day the contract signed, the $5 million would show up in the bank account. And so that's how I learned enterprise selling. And then from there, a friend of mine connected me to Bain Capital Ventures. We were starting our first venture fund at the time here in Boston. It was exclusively early stage, Series A, $250 million fund. And I thought, here's a great opportunity to try the investing side of the business, but also be part of building a venture fund from the ground up. It was a brand new, fund. First one had been raised. And
So this is a bit like also an entrepreneurial. There was the entrepreneurial side of actually doing something from scratch and
it was exciting to me to be part of something. I mean, I sort of the notion of just leaving the startup world and becoming an investor. I struggled with that a lot, and so I kind of got myself comfortable that there was still a building component of BCV. And here I am, 18 years later, and still having fun. It's been great.
And back in Boston. I love it. No,
And back in Boston. That's right.
That's great. Usually we start a little bit out so that the people that join us know a little bit about the fund. So tell us a little bit about Bain Capital Ventures fund sizes. What your thesis is, check sizes, phases that you're looking for. I mean, just a quick wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we our latest funds, which we're announcing here in a few weeks, total 1.3 billion in new capital. Half of that money goes early stage. So early stage for us is seed and Series A primarily. We do some Series Bs, but seed and Series A is our sweet spot. So when a founder, and we're primarily B2B investors. We do a little bit of consumer on the margin, but we're primarily B2B investors. And so at that seed and Series A, we really want to be that partner that the founder views as the person that is going to be with them through that next 7 to 10 year journey. As a confidant, a sounding board, somebody that can bring a network and expertise around the table. And that's sort of half of what we do. And then the other half of what we do is a little bit later stage, kind of classic growth equity businesses that are in hyperscale, they've gotten product market fit, and they need growth capital. And then we organize ourselves around specific domain areas. So we've got a team focused on healthcare, we have a team focused on fintech, on commerce, on infrastructure software, and then lastly, we're geographically distributed today, where when I joined, we were 100% in Boston. I ended up moving out west to spearhead our West Coast expansion, originally in Palo Alto and then in San Francisco. So today, our biggest office is in San Francisco. That's about half our team, and then the second biggest is New York, and then Boston, where I live, and where we still have a lot of roots, is our third largest office.
Now that you moved back, there's hope again to get back to number one.
Exactly. Let's do it.
The ranking. Yeah. Love it. There's another build. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing it. So usually, what kind of check sizes are you writing?
So at seed stage, it's anywhere typically from $500,000 to 3 or 4 million. At Series A stage, it's typically 10 to 15 million, and at the growth stage, it's 25 to 50 million.
Got it. And self-speaking, I mean, your expertise is really in the B2B enterprise area, right?
Yeah, I mean, my focus is really business software. So any software that's being sold to a business person, I haven't done a whole lot selling to IT specifically. And fintech is interesting because I think fintech and software, they're converging. And so I actually have a number of companies where they're really software companies, but they have some kind of fintech embedded within. But that's kind of where I focus. It's really anything that helps add value to businesses using technology.
And like, needless to say, you had like some great successes with SendGrid and Gainsight and Klavi. So a couple of really great and big names out there.
It's been fun. I mean, this business is one where a lot of it is about serendipity and luck, and just over the course of time, have really enjoyed working with some great founders. Mick Mounts here in Boston, you founded Kiva, Nick at Gainsight, Andy at Clary, and others. So it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Now let's go a little bit to our topic here. Trends that VCs are betting on, and I read an article on Medium, by the way, recommended to everybody, and I'll put it later on into the chat, where you say really like tech works in innovation cycles. And I think your hypothesis is like we're just at the beginning of a new tech cycle. what makes you believe that we're at the beginning of a new cycle? And then let's later on talk a little bit about like what are the pillars of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, one of the perspectives I have is having been in B2B software for over 30 years. You know, that first startup I did, you know, was in college. And so I experienced that cycle, you know, in the late 80s and early 90s, you know, inside two startups. And then I've seen sort of the last 20 years, you know, from a venture standpoint. And certainly the last 20 years have been about the cloud. You know, the era I was in, a trilogy, was client server. It was the first time information workers finally had access to laptops. And it was sort of the foundational year. It was, you know, moving technology from mainframe and back office to, you know, out to information workers on laptops. And it was the rise of client server, and that technology wave really ushered in a lot of huge companies in the 90s, including ours. And it was one where, you know, businesses weren't sophisticated. They didn't know how to buy software. And that's why we could charge as much money as we did back then. You know, it was certainly valuable. We were delivering a huge ROI, but we could charge a lot of money. And then that really transitioned, thanks to Mark Benioff, to this era of the cloud. And you know, and the cloud is a technology change, but it really, a set of business changes came with it. You know, this idea that businesses shouldn't have to pay for all this upfront. They should get value. They should pay for the value they're getting. And that really brought in aboard this notion of subscriptions or, you know, recurring models. It really brought in this idea of customer success. I mean, that was one of the reasons we funded Gainsight when they had a few $100K of ARR, because now that more, as a software vendor, more of your revenue is post initial contract signing. You know, literally 95% of your revenue comes after you sign the contract. This notion of customer success becomes really valuable. And so, you know, we've lived through this last 20 years of cloud, and it's created all the unicorns that we all read about. And now I think we're on the verge of this next transition. And I think we all see it and we all live it with bottom-up software, with the fact that people inside businesses, you know, don't want to use the software that's coming top down because it's not solving their problems. They go home at night and they're on Amazon or they're ordering an Uber and they're like, why is this so much easier than what I'm doing at work? You know, and when I order something on Amazon, I know where my package is. I know it's been picked in the warehouse and I know it's on a truck getting to me. But when I'm at the office, I have no idea what's going on with my supply chain. Is my inventory sitting on a container, you know, in the middle of the Suez, or where is it? You know, and so people want those same tools, you know, inside the business. And I think the fact that you know, IT has thrown up their hands and said we can't control you know, this proliferation of software, I think that's ushering in a new revolution.
Okay, so you identified 3 pillars to that, which I've quite found very interesting and insightful. One was really like user-centric products, you know, the customization of even B2B, like some techniques, sales techniques, but also how products are perceived much more customer-centric. Then the global distributed teams, probably a trend that, you know, we've seen all in the last 12, 15 months, like coming up more and more and more with the pandemic, and then creative monetization. Let's start with the user-centric products. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing, like from an investor front, but like also when you have a good eye for operations. And this is not a trend that is, you know, was started 12 months ago. That was a long time in the making. What does that mean? What if I'm starting a company today and I'm B2B, like how can I become more customer centric, and what are the facets that really changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's you know, I remember, you know, again, sort of coming back to this world of CRM, you know, which was the first company I was a part of. You know, when in the 90s when we were building Trilogy, Siebel Systems, which was sort of the non-cloud version of Salesforce, ended up, taking off, and we were debating, should we build a product, in this sort of Salesforce automation space, and much to our detriment, we ultimately did not. And the reason we did not, and this was our mistake, is we said salespeople hate this product. They all hate it. No one wants to enter data. They're forced to enter data. The data is bad. This is a horrible piece of software, and it doesn't make sense to us. And so we ended up not building it, and we got to 300 million in revenue, and Siebel got to $1 billion in revenue, and we were clearly wrong. And Salesforce subsequently has obviously built a behemoth around CRM. But that's sort of a great description of the way software has been built for a long time, even in the cloud era. Like, no one likes Salesforce automation. No one likes Salesforce, in terms of the actual user experience. But the stuff has been sold top down, and it's sold top down, and you have to use it, and you're required to. I remember when I ran a Salesforce, I wouldn't pay expense reports unless you had, filled in your entries in the CRM, and so. But I think what's changing is that we're now in an era where the users are just going to use something else, and we have a good example of this. We have a company called Clary that provides AI-driven forecasting for salespeople, and it sits on top of Salesforce. So we're not trying to rip out Salesforce. We're not saying to the salespeople, don't use Salesforce, but we automatically put the data into Salesforce. We automatically read and write into that database. And so you're seeing this era where the underlying systems of record, thanks to the cloud and thanks to APIs and so forth, are now essentially repositories. And this newer wave of technologies come in, which are these systems of engagement where the users are actually living. And so as a user now inside a corporation, I don't have to live in SAP. I don't have to live in Salesforce. I don't have to live in these systems that weren't built in a user-centric way. I can live in systems that were designed for me. If I'm an SDR, I can live in Salesloft or an Outreach and have a workflow that is designed for the way I do my job. And I don't have to touch, the underlying systems of record. And so I think these are some of the things that we're seeing that are pretty interesting and exciting. That shift that's happening, inside businesses.
So with this customer centricity comes product-led growth. So really like building the growth engine into your product. Tell us a little bit, like you see so many businesses. Can you give us one or two examples where you say like, wow, well done, like this is a new approach or this is a different approach that you were impressed with also from an investor, but also from an probably entrepreneur's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're investors in a business on the West Coast called Homebase, and I met the founder, pre-revenue, and we invested pre-revenue, and what he had built was the actual space he was going after was not a novel space. He was going after a space to help small businesses manage, time clocks and schedules. So if I own a local restaurant or a local retailer, I have a whiteboard in the back of the room that has the weekly schedule and the shifts and who's coming when. And he created a free app that was totally product led to allow you to do that, digitally. And so now my employees would get alerts, an hour before their shift. If they couldn't make it, they had a way to communicate that. I, as the manager, could now manage, my capacity, for the week. And what was interesting is, the founder said, look, this segment, these single location owners have not been served because they're not willing to pay $100, $200 a month for software. And if you need a sales force to call on them, you have to charge at least $100 to $200 in order for them, to make the math work on your cost of customer acquisition. So he said, look, I'm going to just do this with a free product, and for some advanced functionality, I'll get them to pay, but I'm only going to ask them to pay $25 a month. And if we fast forward a couple of years, he now has almost 100,000 businesses using his software, and it's all without any outbound selling effort. He's now layered in a set of fintech products. So he's layered in payroll, and he's layered in a way for employees to get instant cash. And as a result, he if a business chooses to adopt all his software, he can increase the ASP from $25-30 a month up to $200 a month. Um, and lastly, during COVID, when a third of his customers went out of business, and for a period of time, almost 100% of his businesses were closed, he still grew 40%, because the product-led growth engine just keeps working. It just keeps working. So even though a number of businesses closed, new businesses got started, these businesses came back, and people just started using his software without him needing salespeople and so forth. And so that's the beauty of product-led growth, where it either dramatically brings down your cost for customer acquisition, so you can now service sectors and segments that have been underserved, or it gives you a chance to go into a crowded category inside the enterprise, and get early pockets of adoption, so you don't have to, you can sort of use your sales efforts in a very targeted way inside these businesses. So it's an unbelievable way to build a business, but it's hard to do. It's certainly hard to pull off.
There's an art and a craft involved
Yes.
here.
Yes.
By the way, I wanna encourage everybody down here in the Q&As. Ask your question, put your questions in there. We'll get to the Q&A section in a couple of minutes. AJ, another trend that you really saw is obviously the global workforce and global distributed teams. Like, that is something that is valuable within a startup, but on the other hand, there's also business models around that. Maybe you can touch on those two. What you're looking from an investor point of view, but also what you're looking in terms of best practices and operationally when you see teams that you maybe have already in your portfolio and how they deal with that operationally.
Yeah, I mean, as you think about global teams, I mean, I think that and even product-led growth as well as creative monetization, I think the overriding thing to keep in mind is that the category of software is maturing as an industry. And go back to my very first story about enterprise software being, your incremental gross margin is nearly 100%. Well, that creates a huge pricing umbrella. And in a more mature industry, those profits end up getting compressed. And I think we're living through a period over the next 20 years where basic software is getting commoditized. It's easy to build. You have lots of developers around the world creating software. And so in an industry that's commoditizing, how do you win? Well, number one, you win by creative distribution, product-led growth, open source, et cetera. Big expensive sales forces don't work as well. The second thing you do is you can't have your entire workforce in the three most expensive geos on the planet, San Francisco, New York, and Boston. You've got to think about leveraging a global force, because if you're not, your competitors are going to, because you're now competing with startups in San Francisco, New York. You're competing with startups in Estonia, in China, in Bangalore, and in the Philippines. And so you need to have a mindset, just like U.S. manufacturers have had to contend with this. Software companies have to contend with the same issue, which is you're now competing with a global force. And then third, you need to have creative monetization. This is where the Homebase story is so interesting, where the software monetization piece is quite low, but fintech and these other components end up driving a huge amount of monetization for the company. And so I think all three of these factors are interrelated, and it has to do with the fact that software is still a great business, but it's getting more commoditized, it's getting more crowded, it's becoming more mature. And I think that's really what's ushering in these trends and as well as opportunities for new founders.
Yeah. Let's talk quickly about creative monetization. I mean, how can a B2B tech company go beyond like the per seat or the licensing model? Like, what have you seen? What works? And actually, we have a question here from Mahindra, who said, like, would usage-based and managed software fee count as a creative monetization?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few examples of this. I think certainly one is some kind of consumption model, and so if you can layer in a consumption model, whether that's usage based or capacity based, et cetera, I think that's really powerful. And the beauty of consumption models is you can sell to a company that's really tiny, and as those tiny companies become large, then the monetization grows. So I was on the board of SendGrid, and we sold Uber when they were 2 people, and they started using SendGrid, and we're probably not paying anything. And then when Uber became Uber, they were paying millions of dollars a year. So I think usage and consumption certainly, one form of this. I've shared a few examples around fintech where Shopify generates as much monetization from fintech now as they do from software licenses. So that's a big opportunity. I think a third opportunity is some kind of marketplace. That can be an app exchange in the form of a Salesforce. That could be some access to your API. I mean, if you think about like SAP, I mean, imagine a company like that had built like a modern API, and you had to, you had, as a vendor, you had to pay some fees to get access to that API. I mean, they could have made a ton of money from that. And so I think this notion of APIs, marketplaces, et cetera, I think is a third one. Data is a fourth one. Oftentimes you're aggregating a pretty interesting set of data in your system, and are there ways to monetize that, in a privacy protected way, maybe at a more aggregate level. Advertising is another one. I think Amazon today makes more money from advertising than they do from the actual gross margin of what they sell.
And even if you look at Apple and like how they monetize in the end, their Apple, the App Store, you could think about advertising, but it is really maneuvering certain preferences and so on. So that's also a way to kind of have not only advertising, but in the end, it's also you're pushing players that give you a little bit more of a share for it.
That's right. And when you think about all these techniques that have been used in consumer, they're now, I think business software companies are being forced to do the same thing, because consumer is totally commoditized, right? Like as a consumer, you have so many alternatives for anything you want. And so companies either have to deliver an incredible experience, or they have to give you an amazing value. And I think the same is happening in business software. And so I think a lot of these techniques and creative monetization, we're going to see more and more of in the business software world. And I think if you go in as a founder and start a company and just build your company the same old way of MRR and ARR, I think you're missing an opportunity. Now, not all companies are going to have those opportunities. Again, there's still be plenty of businesses built the old-fashioned way, one customer at a time, MRR, and just have it scale up. But I think take some time to think more broadly about some of these other types of opportunities. And if you can then use that to bring down your entry price for businesses, then you can start a flywheel.
And then you're looking really into the customization, because it's kind of, you can do freemium models and use all these tactics and rely later on an upsell or like a land and expand later on, right? Yeah.
Totally.
AJ, let's move to a couple of questions, and I encourage everybody to post their question in the Q&A button right down here. Sarah Rose is asking, what are the most common B2B models which tend to be the most successful? You're seeing so many businesses these days. What do you think are the most successful models? Obviously, what's a model, but maybe you have an answer here.
Well, I mean, I think that the most successful models are ones that figure out some unlock around customer acquisition. I think at the end of the day, that is the key. And product-led growth is one way to do it, where you can dramatically bring down the cost of customer acquisition. Land and expand is another way, where you already own those customers, so your incremental expand is a lot cheaper. Your businesses that have some kind of viral or network effect. I mean, Calendly is a great example where every time a user of Calendly interacts with someone who doesn't have Calendly, that other person gets exposed to Calendly. And that's an example of a business with viral dynamics. Network effects are ones where each incremental customer that comes aboard adds value to all the customers that are already aboard. So I think, and if we as investors, when we meet a business, we sort of say, okay, is this just a straight up one customer at a time business where I sell one customer, I sign them up, then I go and sell the next customer, and then I go sell the next customer. And again, you can build a business that way, but it does require over time that you just are dealing with law of large numbers. As you get bigger and bigger, sheer number of salespeople you've got to add and fund up front in order to generate that revenue just gets more and more expensive. And so if you've got any one of these other levers, product-led growth, open source, developer-led, you've got a viral dynamic, you've got a network dynamic, you've got a land and expand motion. Any of these things, I think, are things we get excited about, as investors. Again, it's not a requirement, but it's certainly more exciting when you have one of those things.
Got it. Can I ask you just from an investor perspective, what is the most capital efficient model? Do you see that it depends on the vertical or the kind of business model, or is this really a matter of how creative the team is and how, let's say, how operational excellent the team is?
Well, I mean, I think that product-led growth is by far the most capital efficient, right? And if we were investors in SolarWinds, way back when, pre the breach. We were not investors during the recent.
Sold.
No, we were not investors. And my partner Ben had found the company, and it was run by two brothers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they had a product that network engineers and network managers side companies would go to a website, see their product, swipe a credit card, and download it. And so we met these two brothers in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The business had 25 million in revenue and had 24 million in profit because it had it only had a few engineers, and that was it. They had no sales and marketing, nothing. It was all product-led growth, all bottom-up growth, and so those are the most, and you hear these stories. We invested in SurveyMonkey. Same stories, two brothers in Portland, and it was just, they wrote the survey thing and it just took off, and people just buy it and pay money for it, and the rest is history. So if you can find a way to unlock some kind of product-led growth, it's an amazing business.
Okay. Adrian Fopp asks about any opinion on latest trends in Proptech. Are you familiar with Proptech at all?
A little bit. I have some partners that focus specifically in Proptech, and I think there's a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot going on on sort of the trying to streamline the whole end-to-end process of buying and selling physical assets, whether on the commercial side, on the residential side. There's a lot going on in terms of making using technology inside these properties. We have a company called Smart Rent that works with multifamily owners, and they install a set of smart devices inside the units, alarms, smart locks, etc. And so if I'm a tenant and I'm looking at a few buildings, a building that has Smart Rent in it, I get an app where I get to manage all this stuff for my apartment, and it's a huge value add for the consumer, and stuff like that are now becoming table stakes for property owners and landlords. Certainly a lot of interesting technology around payments and so forth. You think about, I'm a property owner and I've got all kinds of vendors that are maintenance folks and lawn folks and everything else, and how do I streamline the management and the payment flows going in and out, and so it's a fantastic vertical. There's a lot going on. I think there's going to be a lot going on as we think about the future of cities, post pandemic, and what does it mean for both living and working space, and think about the office of the future and what kinds of technologies are going to be needed to support this idea that some people are in the office 3 days a week. Like I think that could spur a whole host of innovative companies.
Yeah, smart cities and anything beyond that. As I'm trying to get as many questions here from different people, Mark Grindeland asked about any thoughts on edtech. If so, can you give your views on B2B? So really working directly with educational institution versus direct to consumer. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't, as a firm, we haven't done a whole lot in ed tech, but I think a lot of the same lessons apply. I mean, part of the reason why ed tech has been hard is you have a set of institutions that don't have a lot of money, and they typically aren't sophisticated buyers, and for certain segments, you have stakeholders that are have interests and agendas, and I don't. This is not meant in a judgmental way, but interests and agendas that are different than just purely economic. That's just the reality of education. So it's historically been a tough sector to sell into, but I think this is also where product-led growth has been really powerful. A friend of mine runs a company called Quizlet, which is all product-led growth. My kids have used Quizlet since they were in elementary school, but then once you get to graduate school, you got to pay for it. If you're in elementary school, you don't have to pay for it, but they've spent their whole lives getting trained up on Quizlet. And, I think that's a great example. And I think a lot of the tools being used now by teachers, many of them are free tools where you get enough penetration, then you can go to the districts and say, okay, now let me charge you for this.
As we're coming to an end, let's talk a little bit about how people approach you and what you're looking for. Dasha had a question around what are the traits that you're looking for in a young founder? Do you have founders under 25 in your portfolio? I mean, you just confessed that you started your own business at 18. So I'm really looking forward to that answer. What's different working with young founders? So, but first of all, what are you looking in founders, especially young founders?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think we care about age. We have founders that are under 25. We have founders that are over 50, and we have founders under 20. I think what we really look for is, number one, somebody that really is an expert in whatever they're trying to do. I remember when I first met Mick, the founder of Kiva, which is now Amazon Robotics, and he could sort of give me the CEO vision of why the CEO of Staples should want a Kiva system to support their e-commerce growth. But then he could also tell me why the robot he was designing was 32 inches and not 33 inches, and the reasons for that, and technically why that was so important to make the system work. And so that depth, and that span of being able to go up and down, I think we see that in great founders that they have a huge vision, they can articulate that, but they can go super deep on any question that you ask them. I think secondly, we look for markets that we think can be massive, and even if the market today seems small, is there some tailwind or some wave? The market for warehouses for e-commerce at the time of Kiva was tiny back in 2004 when we initially funded Kiva, but now it's massive, right? And we were at the front end of a wave that was just starting to happen. And then third, we're looking for people who have a lot of these intangible traits that I think all of you have who are on this call, that are relentless, persistent, never say die, just willing to live through extreme pain. That's just the nature of being a founder. It's incredibly hard. And I'd say, having seen the journey now a bunch of times with some amazing companies, there's not a single one that I haven't been a part of that didn't have some really dark days where it seemed like it wasn't going to work. And in hindsight, everything is rose-colored glasses. But man, it's tough, and we have it easy.
Do you have a tip there, AJ, for the? I mean, I know that a lot of founders struggle with this whole situation. Sometimes everything is great in one area and really dull in a private area. Any wisdom that you want to share with a founder that's going through a tough time?
Well, I mean, I think this is where I think having, we're in an environment right now where all of you on this call have access to lots of capital, and there's plenty of capital out there. But I think it's really important for a founder to have a true partner, and this is what I personally get my own fulfillment out of, and why I enjoy getting up every day, and why I invest early stage, is when the shit hits the fan, I'm the first phone call that founder calls, because their spouse doesn't have enough context. they don't want to tell the rest of their team because they're the leader of the company. They've got to, first figure out the game plan. And so when, during the moments of calamity, my cell phone rings, and I think just having a partner who has enough context, who can be a sounding board, who can help you. Ultimately, the founder is going to solve it. I'm not going to solve it. But I think you need somebody, and that could be, a mentor, a board member, an investor, but somebody who has enough context, but who's one step removed, that you feel incredibly comfortable being vulnerable with. Being a founder is a very lonely job, and you feel like at times you have no one you can talk to, no one who understands what you're going through, and you need to have somebody that you can be just incredibly vulnerable with around what's happening. I think that's the only way to get through it. It's just too hard otherwise.
And I can, by the way, I can only confirm this, having done it and having through the journey as an entrepreneur. We actually here at Venture Lane, we do like a CEO circle that actually focuses on the 5% that you would not talk about with anybody else because you feel like you can't, but you open up with a couple of circle mates, and that is such a great ventile for so many things that weigh on your shoulders. As we're coming to an end, AJ, there's a question here: is like, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
The best way, I think, is I love the Slack channel that Venture Lane has created. It's amazing how many people have joined and how vibrant it is. So let's use modern technology. Let's use that, and and excited to get to know this community. I'm excited to hopefully do this next one in the offices physically in front of people. So that would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. By the way, we're just in a beta. We launched Venture Lane Connects, which is a virtual platform, a Slack channel, but also a mentor to mentee, peer-to-peer platform. So if you want to join that platform, go on our website, theventurelane.com. There's a button up there that says Connects, and you can apply because right now it's a beta, so we're really like sorting out, but we might put you on a wait list, but we might just get you in there. But then we have like amazing people like AJ in there who are open to answer questions and be there. And thanks so much for that offer. I see we have plenty more questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. AJ, thank you so much for your time, for your insight, for your wisdom. What I really enjoyed today, that you actually did not just talk about the investing process, but you're giving so much thought about, where does the industry go, talking about, the customization or the customization of being, really user-centric on product, how global distributed teams change the whole setup, and then really like how creative monetizations actually change the whole way of how to look into this business that seems to be really at a different stage now, like going even post-pandemic in a whole different direction. So thank you very much for your wisdom and your insights, and yeah, love to catch up whenever you're ready for a coffee, and we'll see you there. Thanks so much, and greetings to you.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun. So thanks so much. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.